Hey everyone, and welcome back to Rowing with the Homies. I'm Finlos, and today is May the 6th, 2025. And I don't know about you, but there was a moment earlier this week, maybe it was over the weekend, I think, where to use one of my favorite words, I was just simply flabbergasted. You know, you come across on social media one of these images or pictures that somebody makes, and you're just like, what were you thinking? Why would you do this? But of course, we see who's in the picture, and we know the subject, and who, of course, then blows it up. And we understand a lot more because the image was of Donald Trump dressed as the Pope. I mean, it's so bizarre. I want to say it's unexpected, but honestly, given the man, it's actually pretty much on brand. But you know what? That's what we do here. That's what this show is all about, trying to make sense of the world, and in doing so, kind of check in with ourselves, right? We're here to talk about the things that grab our attention, whether that's the weird stuff that pops up online, the big ideas that are shaping the places where we live, or the very real, sometimes messy landscape of our own minds. And I think all of those things are kind of colliding in this one image. But you know what? The AI image of Donald Trump as the Pope has really been on my mind. It is, if you haven't seen it, it's something. You know, it has that sort of cartoon but hyper realistic look that most AI images have, but it's of Donald Trump in the full white and gold regalia of a pontiff, of the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. Imagine it with those iconic white robes, the mitre, all of the things that you might typically think of and associate with an image of the Pope in his finest garb. But then with Donald Trump's face. And it's really, no offense intended to the man, although I do find this to be quite offensive, but it's a really jarring juxtaposition. It's like somebody is trying to, well, I mean, it's not like, this is exactly what people are doing, mashing these two concepts of power, right? The spiritual authority of the church with the American political and global authority and power that it has accumulated since its inception. And okay, that is weird and bizarre enough on its own. Like, it's weird that the picture exists. I'm not exactly sure if Donald Trump ordered this image to be made himself. I highly doubt it. But the official White House social media accounts all blared it out, making this an official message of the United States government. And you know, given what we know of the man and his sort of larger than life persona, we might be tempted to just shake our heads and move on. But the timing of this is crucial because the image appeared during the period of waiting and transition between the death of one pope, or the retirement of one pope, in that rare occasion, and the election and elevation of the next pope. It's a time of profound mourning and reflection, a time when the Catholic Church is preparing to choose its new leader. It's a moment of heightened sensitivity, of deep historical and religious significance. I mean, remember, there's over 1 billion Catholics in the world. So to insert very forcibly this kind of image into that context, it's not a random act. It is absolutely deliberate. I mean, even if what the intended outcome might be ambiguous, but it's absolutely attention grabbing. It's that need to be the center of attention that I have come to associate with everything having to do with the Trump name. To understand the potential reaction from Catholics or the Catholic Church, we need to understand, or at least explore, what the Pope represents. The Pope is not just a head of state, he's also the spiritual leader, as I said, of over 1 billion people. He is the successor on earth of St. Peter, the embodiment of centuries of tradition and theological authority. The Church has a very specific understanding of its own authority and its own role in the world. So for them, an image like this isn't just a funny picture. It touches on core issues of respect, of the proper use and recognition of religious symbols, and of the very nature of spiritual power. And that's part of what makes this image so fascinating and so potentially revealing. The reactions to it is so polarized. You have people who are genuinely offended, who see it as a kind of sacrilege, as an affront to their faith. And then you have people who dismiss it as a joke, who say, just lighten up. And then there are people who see something else entirely. Maybe a kind of an aspiration, a desire for a different kind of authority, a blurring of lines between the sacred and the secular. And the range of interpretations there tells us a lot about the cultural moment that we're in, about how we grapple with symbols and with power and with the boundaries between the different spheres of life. And you can argue there's a little bit of cultural appropriation here, though in a very specific context. It's not about ethnicity or race, which is very frequently what we associate with that phrase of cultural appropriation, but more the appropriation of religious symbols and traditions. The vestments, the rituals, the iconography of the papacy, I mean, they're not just like aesthetic choices. Everything is deeply, very deeply meaningful, and they're imbued with centuries of history and significance. And to take these symbols and just use them in a way that might be perceived as flippant or disrespectful can easily be viewed as a violation, a taking of something sacred and using it for a purpose that is at its best ambiguous, and at its worst, most honestly, offensive. And beyond the specific symbols, there's the broader question of authority itself. The papacy represents a very particular kind of authority: spiritual, moral, historical, and it's a kind of power that transcends the purely political or the purely secular. And by inserting himself into that image, by juxtaposing his own form of authority, which is very much rooted in the secular world, with this juxtaposing it with this very different kind of power, there is a risk of undermining, or at least questioning, the authority of the church. It's like saying these two kinds of power are interchangeable, which is deeply problematic. And this image, as we've talked about, or at least as I mentioned earlier, is not an isolated incident for this person. We've seen this pattern of larger than life depictions, often created or enhanced with AI, that portray Trump in these damn near mythic roles. He's a superhero, he's a warrior, he's a king, he's a pope. Oh, and May the 4th was this weekend, right? It's the annual celebration of all things Star Wars. May the 4th be with you. The White House released an AI image of Donald Trump as a Jedi, except somebody, well, maybe they didn't unintentionally do it, but I suspect that somebody doesn't quite understand their Star Wars lore, because in addition to his incredibly unrealistic bulging muscles, Jedi Trump also had a red lightsaber, and everyone knows that only the Sith, the users of the dark side, the embodiments of evil in the Star Wars universe, only the Sith use red lightsabers. But these choices, these very deliberate constructions of images, it's not just about a photograph. It's about creating a new, different reality that is absolutely separate from truth. And I mean, it's natural, at least for me, to wonder about the psychological motivations behind this, because what drives a person to constantly project this image of invincibility, of absolute power? I mean, could it be a genuine expression of confidence? Or is it a way of compensating for some underlying insecurity or feeling of inadequacy? I mean, it's not just the images, right? He also has his presidential doctors every year release very undetailed medical exams that highlight his extreme weight loss, right? All of these things suggest that this kind of behavior, maybe, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but maybe they stem from a need to overcompensate, to project an exaggerated image of oneself to the world in order to mask internal doubts or vulnerabilities, and the constant need for external validation, for the cheers of a crowd, for the affirmation of followers. I mean, I think it's a sign of a fragile sense of self-worth, a need for constant reassurance. And if we connect it to the broader cultural context of image and identity in the digital age, it's like, wow, here's this tool. Let's use it. And you look to his second, well, actually, I'm sorry, he was to look to his third run for the presidency. But all of his runs, really, his needs to be in front of his adoring crowds, his obsession about crowd sizes, an inability to acknowledge mistakes, the need to always frame things as a way of his being right. They're all really indicators of this insecurity. But this really isn't just about one person. It's about the culture in which we live. We live in a world that is increasingly mediated by images, by carefully constructed personas. And we're all, to some extent, curators of our own image, projecting a version of ourselves to the world. And for figures in the public eye, that pressure is, of course, magnified. Not to excuse the behavior, because as a public figure, we should expect more. But this image and the trend it represents speaks to this broader cultural phenomenon of how we construct and present ourselves, how we grapple with identity and self-worth in a world that's constantly demanding our attention, our validation. It's a world where the line between reality and image is increasingly blurred, and that blurring can have profound psychological implications. And that gets me thinking, this image and the way it's being received by some raises this really important and frankly sometimes uncomfortable idea of a cult of personality. And of course, that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but it's crucial to define with some historical and social nuance. It's not just about liking a politician or admiring a leader. It's about a situation where a leader's charisma, their personality, their image become so central that critical thinking, objective evaluation, and even dissenting opinions are diminished or suppressed, and I would actually say and depressed. Again, I'm going to repeat those because I think if we think about the environment in which we are now living, the ways in which news is being relayed to us and through all its various channels, I think these questions are important because a cult of personality manifests to allow a leader's charisma or their personality or their image to override critical thinking, to diminish objective evaluation, and to reject dissenting opinions. It leads to those in power to exist in an infallible vacuum beyond reproach. With Trump and the MAGA movement, you see this very strong emotional connection, this sense of shared identity, this feeling of being a part of something larger than oneself. And it's not just about policy, because Donald Trump doesn't really have a guiding policy. It's about belonging and about feeling seen and heard, about feeling like you're part of a tribe. And that kind of emotional connection can be incredibly powerful, incredibly seductive. It can create a sense of loyalty that transcends rational argument and makes it very difficult to question or criticize the leader, even when there are legitimate reasons to do so. And a lot of that emotional connection is fostered through rhetoric, through the creation of compelling narratives. And Trump, I don't know how, honestly, but he is a master of this. He crafts these stories of us versus them, of a nation in crisis that only he can save, of a battle against shadowy forces that are trying to undermine the true America, whatever the hell that means. And those narratives are incredibly powerful in shaping how people see the world, how they see their place in it, and how they see the leader. And they create a strong sense of in-group loyalty, a sense of shared purpose. But they can also make it very difficult to step back and critically evaluate the situation. And of course, this isn't a new phenomenon. History has shown us leaders who cultivated this kind of intense personal following, who built these movements where loyalty to the leader was paramount and where dissent was seen as betrayal. If you think about some of the major political figures of the past century from various parts of the world and across the political spectrum, this pattern emerges again and again. The charismatic leader, the devoted followers, the suppression of critical thought. It's a recurring human tendency, a dynamic that seems to be inherent in the way we organize ourselves and relate to authority. I mean, the truth is you can apply it to any leader. Those who support Trump would say the same cult of personality exists around Barack Obama. Historians would say the same thing existed around JFK. I mean, and they're not wrong. So, an awareness of our own tendencies is really, really, really important. And I hope that you'll allow me to take a small detour here, which is not really a detour, but sometimes I do think it's helpful to examine these ideas through popular culture because it feels a little safer, because we're not really talking about ourselves, we're talking about this sort of thing over here that's not directly related and it's fictional. But what's really cool but also really frustrating is with the recent success of Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, and the movies that have come out. There's so much potential to learn about this topic just by studying the book or seeing the film and really carefully looking at what's happening. Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, in that story, becomes a messianic figure. Not inherently evil, but he becomes the focal point of an incredible religious devotion from the Fremen people, and they see him as their savior, their chosen one. Mind you, all of these things are crafted intentionally within that world. The book explores, in a really clever and profound way, the very real dangers of that unchecked power, even when it's wielded by somebody who initially has good intentions. It explores how it's not just about an image, but the shaping of a culture and those who wield power through influence, creating the situation where those cultural focal points and people can really do great harm, even if unintentional. It's a cautionary tale about the seductive nature of charisma and the potential for even the most well-meaning leaders to be corrupted by the forces they unleash. And of course, you take the long view of the whole series, and we can argue. But Dune is a really, really clear and powerful examination of this cultural trend. The tragedy of Dune is that this devotion, this blind faith to Paul, ultimately leads to a devastating holy war that spreads and it consumes trillions in the series. But it's a stark reminder of the very real destructive potential of this monolithic devotion, of what happens when critical thinking is sacrificed at the altar of loyalty. It's a fictional extreme, but it's a powerful metaphor for the very real dangers of putting any leader on such a pedestal that critical thought disappears, that dissent is silenced, and that the leader becomes, in effect, untouchable. And this whole dynamic of how we're drawn to powerful figures and the potential pitfalls of that dynamic has a really interesting and I think very important parallel to how our own internal states, particularly when we're struggling with depression, can make us more vulnerable to manipulation, both from the outside and from within. And so today, depression feels like the loss of self-worth. We've been talking about how external figures, whether it's a political leader or a charismatic personality, can really exert this powerful influence, shaping our perceptions, warping our senses of reality, and even making us more susceptible to their agendas. But depression, in a way, can do the same thing from the inside. It's like an internal force that distorts our own self-perception. Makes it very difficult to see ourselves and the world clearly. And that can make us more vulnerable to manipulation, both from others and from our own negative thoughts. And if I think back to a few episodes back when I was talking about the moon and eclipses, I think that's a really interesting comparison to make. It's like the light is still there, the sun is still shining, but something is blocking it, casting a shadow and making everything seem dimmer and less vibrant. And that's how depression often feels. Not that the good things in life have suddenly disappeared, or that the potential for joy and connection are gone, but they're obscured. They're harder to reach and harder to feel. It's because depression and its symptoms heightens negative narratives in our own stories. It tells me I'm not good enough, that my efforts are pointless, that I'm flawed, that I'm undeserving of happiness or success. Like that eclipse is casting a shadow specifically on my perception of me and making me feel small and insignificant. Even when, if I look at the evidence in the real world, objective reality, right? If we just look to the objective reality of these leaders, we can see through whatever it is that they're saying. And the same goes inward as well. If I examine the evidence, I might see things and interpret things very differently. But it's that internal voice that says, why bother trying? You're just gonna fail anyways. I'm just gonna fail anyways. No one really cares. I'm just a burden. And those narratives that we create for ourselves over time become incredibly powerful and shape how we see ourselves and our place in the world. And here's the connection to those powerful figures we're talking about. When we're struggling with depression, with dysthymia, with similar mental health conditions, when our own sense of self-worth is diminished, when we're feeling lost and vulnerable, we can become more susceptible to external validation, even if it's unhealthy, even if it's based on lies or manipulation. We might be more willing to overlook red flags, to accept unhealthy dynamics, to compromise our boundaries just to feel seen, to feel accepted, and to feel like we belong. It's like my internal defenses are down and my critical thinking has become compromised, and we become exploitable. And the same happens with the inner voice too, that negative voice of depression acting as that manipulative force distorts my perception and can lead me down a path of self-sabotage. It's like I'm so desperate for a lifeline, for someone or something to pull me out of the darkness, that I'm more willing to grab onto anything that seems solid, that seems to offer a sense of certainty or belonging, even if it's ultimately not in my best interest. And that's how cults of personality work, right? They offer a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging to something larger than we are. Remember, cult and culture are very closely related. And when we're feeling isolated or worthless because of depression, that kind of offer can be incredibly seductive. It's a dangerous seduction because it can lead us down paths where we lose our own autonomy, our own senses of self, and eventually that voice can become so identified with our sense of self that it becomes truth. And I think it's really important that the key here, I think, is recognizing the dynamic, both the external pull of charismatic figures and the internal distortions of depression. Self-awareness is essential. Vigilance is needed, both to the world around us and to ourselves, to our own narratives. It's about understanding our vulnerabilities while still remaining open. It's about being critical of the narratives that are being presented to us and seeking help, both professional and personal, when we need it. Because building a strong inner core, a resilient sense of self, is the best defense we have against both the allure of external manipulation and the crushing weight of internal negativity. All right, so we've moved from a bizarre AI image, certainly a cultural artifact of our times, to a discussion of the dynamics of power and influence, and finally, the very personal and potentially painful experience of how depression can distort our own senses of self. Obviously, these things interrelate in very complex ways, and I think it's really important that we explore these connections and see how they intertwine. And I really appreciate you sharing your time with me. I sincerely hope that something in this conversation has resonated with you so that you know that you're not alone. I am not a mental health professional. These experiences are my own. If you are in crisis, if you do feel as if you're becoming lost, reach out to somebody, please. You are not alone. These feelings are common. They are valid, but it is also something that you can engage with. That's it for this episode of Rowing with the Homies. Thanks for joining me. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions about this or potential future topics, send an email to finlos@finloslives.com. You can find me on social media. Go to the website, finloslives.com. You can listen to all of my episodes at the website finloslives.com or on your favorite podcasting platform. Please subscribe to the show so you're pinged every time I upload. I look forward to our next conversation.